This is Shannon Holton, Real Salty Dietitian and owner of Sound Growth Nutrition and Wellness. Today's Fun Friday research is all about growth charts. We'll look at the research behind how those growth charts were developed, which growth chart do I use, and some of the things that come from that help us to understand our own child's growth chart. First, the science behind growth charts. I get excited about this topic. It's one of my nerd topics, but it's really interesting to see how different charts were made. We have two common growth charts in the United States for average children, the WHO charts, or World Health Organization, and the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control, growth charts. We use the WHO before two. It's a fun little rhyme to help you remember. But the reasoning behind that is the science. So the science behind those WHO charts were developed by enrolling a group of children at birth. Those children had to come from economically stable families. The moms had to be healthy non-smokers, and the babies had to be single-term births, meaning there weren't twins involved, there wasn't prematurity involved, and there weren't health complications involved. They followed the same group of children from birth to age 2 at intervals to collect the data and create this growth chart. After age 2, the WHO charts did not do that. They just followed groups of children at age 3, groups of children at age 4, and not those same children that were enrolled in the initial study. The CDC charts are similar in that from birth to age 21 on the charts, they just collected data from groups of children. So that's why the WHO has a little bit of an advantage, because they followed those same children for 2 years. After 2 years, because there's not a difference, we do switch to the CDC chart. And the reason that is because the CDC charts came from mostly US population. So we're comparing apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. When we think about that difference, what that difference does is tell us which growth chart can be a standard of growth and which growth chart is really just a reference. A standard means that it's something to achieve. It's a goal. So on the WHO charts from birth to age 2, if you fall anywhere in between the 25th to 75th percentiles, that's really a standard or an ideal growth on that growth chart. But because the CDC charts are so broad, and there weren't a lot of reasons why they wouldn't enroll somebody's data in it, meaning there could be kids that were born premature, or there could be kids that were from lower income households that had food insecurity. It's more of a reference. So the difference between a standard and a reference also is that a reference is really just plotting your child against their own growth. I recommend that for all the growth charts, but in particular, once you hit age 2 and switch over to the CDC charts, we really want to be comparing your child's growth to their own growth. So if they are at the 25th percentile and they have been their whole lives, that's not necessarily a trigger that there's a problem. The problem could come in if for some reason they're really tall, but they are always thin and they're not gaining weight to catch up to their height, or vice versa. If they're really, really high weight percentile, like 80, 90th, but their height has always been short, and that could indicate a problem. But overall, we're looking at those charts to see where my child plots against themselves over time. That gives you clues to whether or not there's a problem. If your child started out at the 25th for weight and lived there for 5 years, and then all of a sudden they jump up to the 75th, that indicates that there was a shift, a change, and there could be a nutrition problem. The other aspects of that is if they drop. So if your child's always been at the 50th percentile and over time they've slowly, their curve is flatlined and they've ended up at the 25th, then we might worry that there's a nutrition problem there. There are some specialty growth charts out there, and those are for children with specific medical conditions or genetic birth issues, things like Down syndrome or cerebral palsy. The caveat or the caution with those is that they were generally created off of a small sample size. So you're still going to use them as a reference against themselves. They might plot better. They might look a little bit better than they do on the regular growth chart, but they're not going to be held to a standard to say we have to achieve the 25th or the 50th percentile on that chart. It's just a reference to themselves again. One other thing that I like to mention is that oftentimes when we think about weight management perspective and children who are plotting high on the growth chart for their weight, when you're talking about younger children in particular who are still having height growth, oftentimes, especially with girls, once you hit 12, 13, 14, we don't see a lot more height growth happening. But in those younger ages, children who are still growing, you may see an accelerated height growth in children who have accelerated weight growth. And it can often give you a false sense of security to say, well, they are gaining a lot of weight, but they're also growing tall too. And it's hard to distinguish whether or not that's the case or if there is really a nutrition problem. And that's why sometimes a dietitian can really help break down that by asking the right questions. We know that children who are overnourished have higher weight percentiles, but they can also have higher height percentiles up until a point. What it generally means is that they achieve their height growth before their peers. It doesn't mean that they're going to be taller at the end of the day. They just get to that height sooner or have that puberty or maturation sooner than their peers. So it's important to really be paying attention to those percentiles and those changes that happen and not to dismiss things that you may have concerns about. And again, a dietitian can offer some advice. This is just a general session. So if you were interested in having your own child's growth chart interpreted because you have some concerns, feel free to reach out to a dietitian, or you can schedule a free trial consultation through my business. And I'm happy to kind of go over that. And that's kind of the first step that I always take in any assessment is looking at a child's growth chart. Then I have questions that I can follow up with to really dig into the meaning behind that growth chart. So I hope this helps a little bit to distinguish why we use growth charts the way we do and how to look at them, and not to get overly concerned if you have a child that's not following what your best friend's child is following, but also to know when to have some concerns and to look for answers from your medical professionals or your registered dietitian.